after e4, c5, knight f3 and g6, white continues with d4. And after take, we have to take with the queen. As mentioned in the previous videos, we're attacking a rook already, so black's best move is knight to f6 to stop that. And we immediately attack the knight with e5. So after the best move, knight to c6, attacking the queen goes to a4. This is all to be seen in the previous videos of this series. And now black continues with knight to d5 and queen to b3. We've been there already. We're attacking the knight. In previous videos, we went through e6, knight b4, knight b6. In this video, we're going to go through knight c7. So now what's the move? Knight g5 is the next move, threatening checkmate straight away. Obviously the move here is e6, but let's see what happens after d5 if black tries to be a bit more active. We're gonna play en passant, and now of course black can't take back because we still have an attack on f7, but the idea was to give up a pawn for development. So knight to e6 now, and strangely enough we take, and we are giving black some development. But the reason why this is still good for white is because this pawn is not poisoned, so queen can take in b7. Rook cannot attack the queen with some development because the knight is hanging. And obviously the move knight to a5 attacking the queen, it looks like the black player is really well developed and everything, but this just loses to bishop b5 check. Black has only got one reasonable way to block, which is with the bishop, but then after bishop takes, black is forced to take with the queen, and then the rook is falling. And in this position, after queen takes b7, what happens if knight goes to d4, something that they've actually tried in a game against me. The knight's threatening c2, and this time rook b8 seems to be possible. So here the white player might start panicking and realize that he might have got a bit too greedy. But white simply plays knight a3, covering the check square, and after rook b8, queen to c7 imposes a swap. And after take, white is simply winning and is got nothing to fear. The rook will have to move after rook c8 with an attack on the pawn. Bishop f4 defends the pawn good enough, and there's nothing left to do. So let's say black keeps developing bishop g7, well, bishop a6. There was no other way to avoid that. So from the start, after e4, c5, knight f3, g6, now d4, take with the queen, and black plays knight f6. We attack the knight, and after best move attacking our queen with the knight in c6, queen a4, knight d5, and now queen b3. So we need to go through knight c7 in this video. White now plays knight g5 with threat, and e6 is pretty obvious. Now white goes back to the e4 with the knight, aiming at the square, knight f6, and there's a million things that can go wrong here. Black has to play like an engine, and even then he's still losing because the hyper accelerated dragon, which is g6 opening with the Sicilian, is not a good defense. So let's make an example of how wrong things go after bishop to g7. Okay, bishop g5 now. There's only one response. Okay, we're attacking the queen can't go anywhere. Blocking with the bishop doesn't make sense. Blocking with the pawn doesn't do anything because you can just take with the pawn. It comes with an attack on the bishop has to move, you're threatening a check, winning the queen. It's a disaster. So after knight to e7 blocking, white continues with knight d6 check, only move is king to f8, and now queen to f3. It's game over already. Best move according to the engine for black is queen to e8 to defend the f7 checkmate square, but you can just take the queen with the knight. There is nothing else. f6 or f5 you can just take either way. f6 or even f5 you can take en passant, take, and you're attacking the knight and the bishop. It's a fork, and there's going to be a checkmate at some point. In this position we mentioned how bishop g7 cannot be played because of bishop g5. So h6 now by black, and the idea of trying to play a normal game is stopped anyway by knight f6 check. Only move that makes sense is king e7 because black doesn't want to lose the queen for nothing, for a knight. King e7, knight c3 by white. And so will black be able to develop and play a normal game? Bishop to g7, and now white plays queen to a3 check. The king can't go anywhere, so d6 has to happen. White continues with bishop e3. And now black has to play the best move in the position, which is knight takes pawn. If black tries to get rid of this incredibly strong knight, let's quickly explore what happens. So bishop takes, you take the pawn with check, and this is a fork. Obviously the queen cannot take back because bishop c5 wins the queen, and if the king cannot take back, so the king will have to move possibly to a light square because otherwise there's going to be a discovered attack. So let's say king e8, but either way we take the knight, and after queen takes back, knight to b5. The queen has to move, let's say queen to d7, in order to not swap with our queen because we're threatening after the swap to play knight c7, winning the rook, the well-known fork. So after queen d7 anyway, you can play rook to d1, and now the queen has to move. And if she plays queen to e7, then bishop to c5 is deadly, as you can see. And the best move by black in this position after knight b5 attacking the queen is forcing a swap queen, and we take the swap, and now we can play knight c7. So in this position we mentioned that bishop cannot take knight, that knight is there to stay. The best move according to the engine is knight takes pawn in e5, which is fair enough. So now we have to retreat at f knight to e4, knight e4. Let's quickly explore two options. The best move by black, which is king f8, and the normal looking move rook e8. But when I say the normal looking move, I mean every other move pretty much will lead to the same result. So you'll see in a minute why king f8 was the best move. So any move by black now is met by this pattern, knight to d6. Of course, as we saw before, queen takes is met by bishop c5, pinning the queen to the king. And this is just too devastating because, you know, if the king moves to the d file, you can castle long. You can just have fun and do whatever you want. White is threatening anyway, very strong discover check if the king were to stay on the same diagonal as the queen. So for example, king moves. Now the best move is take the rook, king takes back, and now knight e4. White is completely winning, as you can see. An attempt of putting more defense over the square d6 by attacking the queen with the bishop in f8, for instance, is met with a favorable swap, bishop to c5. Now we got two pieces attacking the bishop, so after bishop takes, queen takes. The advantage is huge, and there's no point in continuing this line. In this position, we mentioned how much everything loses to knight d6. So what happens after king f8, which is the best move? Here there's not much after knight d6 because the king will have a shelter, and the best move is to castle long side. Although I'm not saying that knight d6 was a bad move. And after black's best move, queen e7, and white's best move, bishop e2. Black's best move is king to g8, and white will finish this easy endgame with queen to d6, forcing a swap. The queen can't just move away because then it will lose the knight, so the queen has to accept the swap, and now knight takes. Here there's a situation to remember. This knight is going to be attacked by the f4 pawn, so if black plays, I don't know, bishop d7 just to develop f4, and when the knight moves you gotta sacrifice in f7. If king takes, well, if king doesn't take, you're still going to take the bishop in d7 with the rook, potentially with a check if the king is taken, and then winning another piece, or well, just winning a lot of material either way.